Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought on foreign soil, but in the quiet desperation of trying to rebuild a life that war has shattered. For Marcus Rivera, that battle was playing out in a truck stop parking lot outside Phoenix, where he'd been living in his beaten-up Honda Civic for 3 months. The 34-year-old Army veteran had skills that could fix almost anything mechanical, but finding steady work when your address is, quote, "wherever I parked last night," proved nearly impossible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the asphalt as Marcus walked past the rows of RVs and 18-wheelers, carrying his toolbox and searching for odd jobs. Drivers knew him by now, the quiet guy with steady hands and honest prices who could diagnose engine troubles that stumped certified mechanics. What they didn't know was that every small repair job was the difference between eating that day or going hungry. Then he spotted it, a luxury motorhome worth more than most people's houses, smoke billowing from under its hood while an elderly man stood beside it looking completely helpless. Marcus had learned to read people during his 2 tours in Afghanistan, and something about this stranger's genuine distress made him approach despite having only $3 to his name. What Marcus couldn't have known was that this broken-down RV would lead him to discover something that would challenge everything he thought he understood about worth, dignity, and the true meaning of service. The smoke wasn't as bad as it looked, Marcus realized, as he approached the stranded motorhome. Years of maintaining military vehicles in harsh conditions had taught him to distinguish between catastrophic failure and fixable problems. This looked fixable, though expensive if you had to pay shop rates. "Need some help?" Marcus asked, setting down his worn toolbox beside the vehicle. The man turned, and Marcus was struck by the contrast between the luxury RV and its owner's simple appearance. He looked to be in his 70s, wearing khakis and a plain polo shirt that could have come from any discount store. "I'm afraid I'm not much good with engines," the man said with a self-deprecating smile. "The dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree about 10 minutes ago. Then all this smoke started pouring out." He extended his hand. "I'm William Chen, and I'm very grateful you stopped." Marcus shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact. "Marcus Rivera. Let me take a look under the hood, see what we're dealing with." The engine compartment revealed a problem Marcus had seen before. A burst radiator hose had dumped coolant all over the hot engine block, creating impressive amounts of steam and smoke but no permanent damage. The repair would cost maybe $20 in parts if you knew where to shop, but most RV service centers would charge 10 times that amount plus labor. "Good news," Marcus said, straightening up from his inspection. "It's just a radiator hose. Messy but not serious. Bad news is you'll need to let the engine cool down completely before we can work on it, and you'll need a replacement hose." William's face showed relief mixed with concern. "How long will that take? And I hate to ask, but do you know how much something like this usually costs?" Marcus found himself studying William's expression, looking for the calculation he'd learned to expect when people realized they had him over a barrel. A stranded traveler, a specialist repair, a mechanic with no fixed address. The formula usually ended with someone trying to negotiate his rates down to almost nothing. But William just looked genuinely worried about the inconvenience and cost. "Engine should be cool enough to work on in about an hour," Marcus said. "As for cost, depends on where you get the parts. Auto parts store will charge you maybe $60 for the hose, plus whatever you want to pay for labor. RV service center might hit you for $300 or more." William nodded thoughtfully. "And what would you charge for the repair?" This was always the moment Marcus dreaded. Quote, too high, and people assumed he was taking advantage. Quote, too low, and they questioned his competence or figured the repair wouldn't last. He'd learned to aim for honest middle ground and hope for the best. "Parts at cost plus 50 for labor," he said. "Should have you back on the road in 2 hours. And the repair will hold as long as you own the vehicle." William's response surprised him. "That seems remarkably fair. Are you sure that's enough? I mean, you're solving a problem I couldn't handle myself, and time has value." Marcus felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. When had he last met someone who worried about paying him fairly rather than trying to negotiate him down? It's a straightforward job. 50's fair. They spent the next hour talking while the engine cooled. William asked about Marcus's background with the kind of genuine interest that made conversation easy. Marcus found himself sharing more than he usually did with strangers. His army service, his struggle to find steady work, his current living situation without going into the more depressing details. "You mentioned you've been between jobs," William said as Marcus gathered his tools to begin the repair. "What kind of work are you looking for?" Marcus paused with a wrench in his hand. "Honestly, anything steady. I'm good with mechanical systems, electronics, problem solving. Military trains you to adapt to whatever needs doing, but most employers want an address, references, the whole traditional package." William was quiet for a moment, watching Marcus work with the focused efficiency of someone who'd performed similar repairs hundreds of times. "You know, I might know someone who needs help with technical projects. Someone who values skill over paperwork." The repair went smoothly. Marcus replaced the burst hose, refilled the cooling system, and tested everything twice to make sure there were no leaks or air pockets. The engine started immediately and ran clean, with all dashboard warning lights dark. "Outstanding work," William said, inspecting the repair with obvious satisfaction. "How much do I owe you?" "28 for the hose, 50 for labor," Marcus replied. "78 total." William pulled out his wallet and handed over a $100 bill. "Keep the change. You've saved my entire trip." The $22 tip was generous but not excessive. Exactly the kind of thoughtful gesture that suggested William understood the value of good work without being flashy about his appreciation. Marcus found himself genuinely grateful, not just for the money but for being treated with respect. "Where are you headed?" Marcus asked as he packed up his tools. "Sedona area," William replied. "I try to spend a few weeks there every year. Something about the landscape helps me think more clearly." He paused, seeming to consider something. "Marcus, I'd like to ask you a favor. I'm not as young as I used to be, and this trip has reminded me that mechanical problems can happen anywhere. Would you be interested in following me up there? I'd pay your fuel and meals, plus $150 a day just to have someone reliable nearby in case something else goes wrong." Marcus stared at the older man, trying to process the offer. A week in Sedona would mean steady income, regular meals, and a chance to see country he'd never visited. But it seemed too good to be true, and experience had taught him to be wary of offers that seemed too generous. "You don't know anything about me beyond the last hour," Marcus said carefully. "Aren't you worried about traveling with a stranger?" William smiled. "I've learned to trust my instincts about people. You stopped to help someone you didn't know, quoted an honest price for good work, and did the job right the first time. That tells me what I need to know about your character." The drive to Sedona gave Marcus time to think about how quickly his circumstances had changed. That morning, he'd been scrounging for enough work. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. To buy lunch. Now he was following a luxury motorhome through some of the most beautiful country in America, with guaranteed income for at least a week and the promise of regular meals. William proved to be excellent company during their stops for fuel and food. He asked thoughtful questions about Marcus's military service without pushing for details about combat experiences. He shared stories about his own travels with the kind of enthusiasm that made even ordinary road trip incidents sound interesting. There was something calming about his presence, a quality of focused attention that made Marcus feel heard in a way he hadn't experienced in months. They reached Sedona just as the late afternoon sun was painting the red rocks in shades of gold and crimson. William had reserved spots at a campground that catered to RV travelers, complete with electrical hookups and clean facilities. Marcus set up his small tent on the site adjacent to William's RV, grateful for the first real shower he'd had access to in weeks. "Tomorrow I'd like to show you something," William said as they sat outside his RV, watching the sunset paint the rock formations. "A project I've been working on that might interest you." Marcus nodded, content to let the older man set the pace. The day had given him more financial security than he'd felt in months, and he was in no hurry to question the good fortune. That evening, as he lay in his sleeping bag looking up at stars undimmed by city lights, Marcus found himself thinking about the concept of luck. He'd stopped believing in it during his second deployment, when good soldiers died in random explosions while others survived through pure chance. But meeting William felt like something more than coincidence, like a door opening just when he'd begun to think all the doors were permanently closed. The next morning brought clear skies and the kind of desert air that made everything feel possible. William was already up, making coffee on a small camp stove outside his RV. He handed Marcus a steaming mug and gestured toward the red rocks that surrounded their campground. "I want to show you why I come here," William said. "There's a place about an hour's hike from here where you can see the whole valley. But more importantly, it's where I do my best thinking about problems that seem impossible to solve." The hike proved more challenging than Marcus had expected. The trail wound through pinyon pines and across slick rock sections that required careful attention to footing. But William, despite his age, moved with the confident efficiency of someone who'd made this journey many times before. "You mentioned yesterday that you're good with technical problems," William said as they paused at a scenic overlook. "What kinds of systems have you worked on?" Marcus considered the question. In the Army, everything from communications equipment to vehicle maintenance to improvised solutions when standard equipment failed. Since getting out, mostly automotive repair, some residential electrical work, computer troubleshooting, I pick things up pretty quickly. William nodded approvingly. The ability to learn new systems is more valuable than expertise in any specific technology. Technology changes too fast for specialization to keep up. They reached their destination just as the morning sun cleared the eastern mountains. The vista was stunning. Red rock formations stretching to the horizon, with patches of green where desert streams supported cottonwood groves. But what caught Marcus's attention was William's reaction to the view. The older man stood quietly for several minutes, his expression suggesting he was processing thoughts that went far beyond tourist appreciation. "Marcus, I want to tell you something about myself," William finally said, "something that might change how you think about our arrangement." Marcus felt a familiar tension in his shoulders, the same alertness that had kept him alive in dangerous situations. "Okay, I'm not just a retiree who likes to travel in a nice RV," William continued. "I founded a technology company that became rather successful. These days, I spend most of my time trying to figure out how to use that success to solve problems that matter." The words hung in the desert air while Marcus tried to process their implications. A successful technology company could mean anything from a small software firm to something much larger. But the casual way William mentioned it, combined with the obvious quality of his RV and his complete lack of concern about repair costs, suggested the latter. "How successful are we talking about?" Marcus asked. William smiled. "Successful enough that I can afford to spend months each year looking for people who approach problems the way you do. People who see what needs to be done and do it well, without worrying about whether it's officially their responsibility." The conversation that followed revealed William Chen to be the founder of Nexus Technologies, a company Marcus recognized as one of the major players in cloud computing infrastructure. William had stepped back from day-to-day operations years earlier, but remained involved in the company's strategic direction and philanthropic initiatives. "I've been thinking about a problem for several years now," William explained as they began their hike back to the campground. "How do you identify people with real integrity and practical skills in a world where everyone knows how to present themselves well on paper? Credentials and interviews only tell you so much about how someone behaves when they think no one important is watching." Marcus felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to fit together. "So you drive around in an RV, create mechanical problems, and see how people respond?" "Not exactly," William laughed. "The breakdown yesterday was completely genuine. Though I admit I was curious to see how various people at the truck stop would react. Most just walked past. A few offered help but quoted prices that would have been more expensive than calling a professional service. You were the only one who stopped, assessed the problem accurately, and offered to fix it for a fair price." They walked in comfortable silence for several minutes while Marcus processed this information. He'd been thinking of William as a fortunate encounter, someone whose generosity had temporarily improved his circumstances. Now he realized he was being evaluated for something, though he wasn't yet sure what. "What kind of problem are you trying to solve?" Marcus asked as they approached the campground. William stopped walking and turned to face him directly. I want to create jobs for people like you. Veterans, displaced workers, people with real skills who've been failed by traditional employment systems. But not charity work. Legitimate positions where competence matters more than connections. The concept was intriguing but abstract. Marcus had heard variations of this promise before, usually from well-meaning people who didn't understand the practical barriers that kept skilled people unemployed. What would that look like in practice? Come with me for the rest of my trip, William said. 2 more weeks, visiting some projects I'm funding in different parts of the Southwest. You'll see what I'm working on, and I'll learn whether my instincts about your capabilities are accurate. At the end of 2 weeks, we'll both know whether there's a foundation for something more permanent. Marcus studied William's face, looking for signs of the patronizing charity that had made previous offers uncomfortable. Instead, he saw the same direct evaluation he'd noticed during their first conversation. Someone trying to solve a genuine problem by finding the right people to work with. What happens if your instincts are wrong? Marcus asked. Then you'll have had 2 weeks of steady income and interesting travel, and I'll have learned something about my evaluation process, William replied. Either way, it's better than where we both were yesterday morning. That afternoon, William showed Marcus the first of his projects, a solar installation company run entirely by veterans, located in a small town outside Flagstaff. The operation was housed in a converted warehouse that buzzed with purposeful activity. Teams of installers worked on training exercises, while others planned residential and commercial installations throughout northern Arizona. We started with 6 people 18 months ago, explained Sarah Martinez, the company's operations manager and a former Navy electronics specialist. Now we're up to 42 employees and expanding into New Mexico. Marcus watched the training sessions with professional interest. The work combined electrical knowledge, mechanical skills, and problem-solving ability, exactly the kind of technical challenges he enjoyed. But what impressed him most was the atmosphere. People worked with the focused efficiency he remembered from well-run military units, but without the underlying tension that came from life-or-death stakes. How do you find qualified people? Marcus asked Sarah during a break in the demonstrations. Mostly word of mouth through veteran networks, she replied. But we also get referrals from people who understand what we're looking for. People like William who know how to spot competence. William spent the afternoon talking with employees and reviewing expansion plans with Sarah. Marcus noticed that his conversations focused on practical challenges rather than abstract business theory. How do you maintain quality standards while scaling up quickly? What training approaches work best for people transitioning from military to civilian technical work? How do you build customer trust in markets where solar installation has been dominated by less reliable companies? The questions suggested someone who understood the difference between good ideas and workable solutions. Marcus found himself increasingly curious about William's other projects and what role he might play in them. That evening, as they prepared dinner at their campsite, William shared more details about his approach to creating employment opportunities. Traditional job training programs often fail because they focus on teaching specific skills rather than helping people apply the capabilities they already have, he explained. Veterans especially. They've been trained to handle complex, high-pressure situations, but civilian employers often can't see past the gap in traditional credentials. Marcus nodded, remembering his own frustrating experiences with job interviews where his military experience seemed to count for nothing. Most hiring managers don't understand that fixing a Humvee transmission in a sandstorm teaches you things that no automotive school covers. Exactly. So instead of trying to educate employers about veteran capabilities, I'm creating companies where those capabilities are recognized and valued from day one. The conversation continued late into the evening, ranging from practical questions about business operations to broader discussions about economic opportunity and social responsibility. Marcus found himself matching William's analytical approach, asking detailed questions about financing, market development, and sustainability planning. You think like an entrepreneur, William observed as they finally began cleaning up their dinner dishes. I think like someone who's had to solve problems with limited resources, Marcus replied. Military teaches you to improvise, adapt, and accomplish missions regardless of what obstacles you encounter. William smiled. That's exactly the mindset I'm looking for. The next few days established a routine that felt both purposeful and relaxed. Mornings began with coffee and planning discussions about the day's activities. William shared details about his various projects, while Marcus asked questions that helped him understand both the business logic and practical challenges involved. Afternoons were spent visiting project sites, meeting with employees and partners, and observing operations firsthand. Each site revealed different aspects of William's approach to creating meaningful employment. A manufacturing facility in Tucson produced precision components for renewable energy systems using a workforce composed primarily of displaced factory workers. A logistics company in Albuquerque specialized in delivering supplies to remote locations throughout the Southwest, staffed by veterans who understood the importance of reliable execution under challenging conditions. Marcus gradually understood that he was seeing pieces of an integrated system designed to create economic opportunities while addressing real market needs. The solar installation company didn't just provide jobs. It delivered high-quality services that helped customers reduce energy costs. The manufacturing facility produced components that other companies needed for their own operations. The logistics company solved transportation problems that traditional carriers couldn't handle efficiently. "It's not charity," William explained during one of their evening discussions. "It's business that happens to create the kind of jobs that match people's actual capabilities rather than their paper qualifications." Marcus was beginning to see where he might fit into this system, but he was also developing questions about sustainability and growth potential. How do you maintain quality and company culture as these operations expand? And how do you replicate this model in other regions? These questions led to William's most significant revelation yet. "That's the problem I need help solving," he said. "I can start these companies and provide initial funding, but I can't personally manage their development as they grow. I need someone who understands both the technical aspects of the work and the human dynamics of building teams." The implication was clear, but Marcus wanted to understand the specifics before making assumptions. "What would that role look like?" "Regional Operations Coordinator," William replied. "Someone who can evaluate new opportunities, assess potential employees, troubleshoot operational problems, and help local managers adapt our approaches to their specific markets. Based here in the Southwest initially, but with the potential to expand the model nationally if it proves successful." Marcus felt the same mixture of opportunity and uncertainty he'd experienced when William first suggested extending their arrangement. The position offered exactly the kind of meaningful work he'd been hoping to find: challenging, important, and well-matched to his capabilities. But it also represented a level of responsibility that would fundamentally change his life. "I'd need to prove I can handle that kind of role," he said carefully. "That's what the rest of this trip is for," William replied. "By the end of 2 weeks, we'll both know whether this makes sense." The following morning brought their first real test of how well they could work together under pressure. William received a call from Sarah Martinez reporting that the solar installation company was facing a crisis that threatened to shut down operations. A key piece of equipment had failed during a major residential installation, leaving a customer without power and creating potential liability issues. "We need someone to assess the situation and coordinate a solution," William told Marcus as he explained the problem. "Sarah's team knows the technical aspects, but this requires someone who can think strategically about customer relations, equipment procurement, and project management simultaneously." Marcus felt the familiar alertness that came with being handed a complex problem requiring immediate action. "What resources do we have available?" The drive to Flagstaff took 2 hours, during which William briefed Marcus on the company's capabilities, relationships with equipment suppliers, and customer service protocols. By the time they arrived at the job site, Marcus had developed a preliminary plan for addressing both the immediate crisis and the underlying system vulnerabilities that had allowed it to develop. The failed equipment turned out to be a specialized inverter that converted the solar panels' direct current output to alternating current compatible with the customer's electrical system. The unit had developed an internal fault that caused it to shut down completely, leaving the customer's home dependent on grid power, despite having a fully functional solar array on the roof. Marcus spent an hour analyzing the situation, talking with the installation crew, examining the failed equipment, and reviewing system specifications. The technical problem was straightforward. They needed a replacement inverter with compatible specifications, but the solution required coordinating multiple moving parts under time pressure. "Here's what I recommend," Marcus told Sarah and William after completing his assessment. "The customer needs power restored today, but we can't get an exact replacement unit until tomorrow. So we install a temporary solution using equipment we have in stock, then return tomorrow to complete the permanent installation. The plan required creative thinking about system configuration, careful customer communication to manage expectations, and precise coordination between the installation crew, parts suppliers, and customer service representatives. Marcus found himself naturally assuming the coordination role, making decisions quickly while keeping everyone informed about the overall strategy. The temporary installation was completed by late afternoon, restoring the customer's solar power capability with only minor limitations. The customer, who had been understandably frustrated that morning, expressed satisfaction with both the quick response and the clear communication about what to expect next. Outstanding work, Sarah told Marcus as they wrapped up the day's activities. You took a situation that could have damaged our reputation and turned it into a demonstration of our problem-solving capabilities. William had observed the entire process without interfering, asking occasional questions but mostly watching how Marcus approached the various challenges. During the drive back to their campsite, he offered his assessment of the day's events. You did exactly what I hoped you would do, he said. You understood the technical problem, developed a workable solution, and executed it while keeping everyone focused on the larger objectives. That's the kind of operational thinking these companies need as they grow. Marcus felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond the specific success of the day's crisis management. For the first time in months, he'd been able to use his full range of capabilities to solve a meaningful problem. The work had felt natural in a way that simple repair jobs never did. I enjoyed it, he admitted. It reminded me of the best parts of military problem-solving, without the life-or-death pressure. That's what I was hoping to hear, William replied. The remaining week of their trip continued to reveal new aspects of William's integrated approach to creating meaningful employment. They visited a training facility where recent veterans learned advanced manufacturing techniques, a research center where displaced engineers worked on renewable energy innovations, and a consulting company that helped small businesses adapt to changing technology requirements. Each location demonstrated different solutions to the same underlying challenge: how to create economic opportunities that matched people's capabilities rather than forcing them to fit artificial credential requirements. Marcus began to understand that William's wealth provided the initial capital, but the real innovation lay in understanding how to structure work environments that brought out people's best capabilities. The trip's final project visit took them to Phoenix, where a veteran-owned security company provided services for technology companies throughout the Southwest. The business had grown from a small residential security operation to a significant commercial enterprise by focusing on clients who needed security personnel capable of understanding and protecting complex technical systems. Most security companies provide guards who check badges and watch monitors, explained David Kim, the company's founder and a former Army intelligence specialist. We provide people who understand what they're protecting and can recognize threats that wouldn't be obvious to conventional security personnel. Marcus was impressed by the sophistication of the operation and the evident pride that employees took in their work. The company had created a niche market by leveraging capabilities that traditional security firms couldn't match, then built a sustainable business around that competitive advantage. This is the model I want to replicate in other regions, William explained as they toured the facility. Identify underutilized capabilities, create businesses that can leverage those capabilities effectively, then provide the support and resources necessary for sustainable growth. The conversation that evening marked a transition point in Marcus's understanding of what William was offering. Instead of simply providing him with a job, William was inviting him to become a partner in developing an approach to economic development that could potentially be scaled nationally. I need someone who can identify opportunities, evaluate people, and build relationships with local partners, William said. Someone who understands both the business fundamentals and the human dynamics involved in creating these kinds of enterprises. Marcus had been thinking about exactly these questions throughout their trip. The biggest challenge I see is maintaining quality and culture as operations scale up. These companies work because they're small enough for personal relationships to matter, but that becomes harder to sustain with growth. Agreed. What would you do about that? The question led to a detailed discussion about organizational structure, training approaches, and performance evaluation systems. Marcus found himself drawing on his military experience to suggest frameworks for maintaining standards while accommodating growth. The conversation continued past midnight, ranging from practical implementation details to broader questions about economic policy and social responsibility. You've been thinking about this more deeply than I expected, William observed as they finally prepared to end their evening discussion. "I've been thinking about it for months without realizing it," Marcus replied. "Every time I couldn't get a job because my experience didn't match conventional expectations, every time I met another veteran struggling with the same problems, I was thinking about why the system doesn't work and what might work better." William smiled. "That's exactly the kind of thinking I need help with." The trip's final morning brought both a sense of completion and the beginning of something much larger. As they prepared to part ways, William returning to California, Marcus still uncertain about his immediate plans. William made his formal offer. "I'd like you to consider becoming my Southwest Regional Coordinator, with responsibility for developing new projects and supporting existing operations throughout Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. The position would include a base salary of $85,000, comprehensive benefits, travel and relocation expenses, and performance bonuses based on project success metrics." Marcus had known this offer was coming, but hearing the specific terms made it feel suddenly real. The salary alone was more than he'd earned in his best year since leaving the military, and the benefits package would provide security he hadn't experienced since his Army service ended. But beyond the financial aspects, the position represented an opportunity to work on problems that mattered, using capabilities that had been undervalued in traditional employment markets. It offered the possibility of helping other people in situations similar to his own, while building something sustainable and scalable. "I'm interested," Marcus said carefully. "But I want to make sure I understand what success looks like from your perspective." William outlined performance metrics that focused on both quantitative results, number of jobs created, revenue growth, employee retention rates, and qualitative outcomes like community impact and employee satisfaction. The evaluation framework suggested someone who understood that sustainable business success required attention to multiple stakeholder interests, not just financial returns. "The most important metric is whether we're creating the kind of work environments where people can contribute their best capabilities," William concluded. "If we get that right, the business results will follow." Marcus spent the drive back to Phoenix thinking about how drastically his circumstances had changed in 2 weeks. He'd started the period as an unemployed veteran living in his car, surviving on odd jobs, and rapidly dwindling savings. He was ending it with an offer to join a meaningful enterprise that could provide both financial security and the opportunity to help address problems he cared about deeply. The decision felt obvious on one level. He had nothing to lose and everything to gain by accepting William's offer. But he also recognized that success in this role would require capabilities he'd never tested in a civilian context. Military leadership and problem-solving experience provided a foundation, but building sustainable businesses required skills that couldn't be assumed from his background. During their final conversation at the Phoenix airport, Marcus expressed both his enthusiasm for the opportunity and his concerns about meeting William's expectations. "I want to do this work," he said, "but I want to be honest about the fact that I'll be learning business development and project management as I go." William's response revealed why their partnership might succeed. "I'm not looking for someone who already knows how to do this job," he said. "I'm looking for someone who can figure out how to do it well. Your military experience taught you how to accomplish missions under challenging conditions using available resources. That's exactly the capability this role requires." Marcus accepted the position that afternoon, beginning a relationship that would transform not only his own life, but eventually create opportunities for thousands of people facing similar challenges throughout the Southwest and beyond. The homeless veteran who had stopped to help a stranger with a broken-down RV had discovered something more valuable than money, the chance to build a legacy of meaningful work and genuine service. But as Marcus would soon learn, accepting William's offer was only the beginning of a journey that would test every capability he possessed and reveal truths about business, community, and personal integrity that neither of them had anticipated. The real challenges lay ahead, in the complex work of turning good intentions into sustainable enterprises that could change lives while generating the results necessary for long-term success. The story of how a simple act of roadside assistance had led to this moment would become legend within William's network of companies, inspiring others to believe that opportunity could emerge from the most unexpected encounters. But for Marcus, the legend was less important than the work itself, the daily effort of building something worthy of the trust that had been placed in him and the people whose lives depended on getting it right. 3 months into his new role as Southwest Regional Coordinator, Marcus Rivera stood in a converted airplane hangar outside Albuquerque, watching 24 veterans learn precision welding techniques that would qualify them for aerospace manufacturing jobs. The facility hummed with focused energy as former soldiers, sailors, and Marines bent over practice stations, their movements gaining confidence with each completed exercise. The transformations still amazed him. What had started as William Chen's experiment in alternative employment was becoming a network of interconnected enterprises that defied conventional business wisdom. Companies that prioritized character over credentials were not only surviving but thriving in competitive markets, proving that integrity and competence could generate sustainable profits. Marcus had learned to recognize the signs of a successful integration. New employees typically went through 3 phases during their first months. Initial skepticism gave way to cautious engagement as they realized the work environment genuinely valued their capabilities. Then came a period of intense dedication as they discovered how much they'd missed having meaningful challenges. Finally, a quiet confidence emerged as they began contributing to something larger than individual survival. The retention rate here is remarkable, observed Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a workforce development specialist from the University of New Mexico, who was documenting the training program's effectiveness. 96% completion rate, with 88% of graduates remaining employed after 18 months. Marcus nodded, but his attention was focused on a different metric, the quality of work being produced and the evident pride employees took in their contributions. Numbers could be manipulated, but the atmosphere in successful facilities was unmistakable. People worked with the purposeful efficiency of teams accomplishing important missions. The welding program represented Marcus's first major expansion of Williams' model. After identifying a shortage of qualified aerospace welders throughout the Southwest, he'd partnered with local manufacturers to create a training pipeline that guaranteed employment for successful graduates, while providing companies with skilled workers who understood precision and responsibility. The key difference from traditional job training programs is the selection process. Marcus explained to Dr. Rodriguez as they observed a particularly challenging welding exercise. "We don't recruit people based on unemployment status or demographic categories. We look for individuals who demonstrate problem-solving ability, attention to detail, and willingness to take responsibility for outcomes." The selection criteria had evolved through trial and error during Marcus's first projects. Academic credentials and previous job titles proved less predictive of success than behavioral indicators observed during practical exercises. Veterans often excelled because military training emphasized completing missions regardless of obstacles, but the same qualities could be found among displaced workers who'd maintained equipment under difficult conditions, or single parents who'd managed complex household logistics while working multiple jobs. "How do you identify these qualities during the recruitment process?" Dr. Rodriguez asked. Marcus gestured toward the current training session. "We don't rely on interviews or resumes. We present candidates with real problems that require the same kinds of thinking they'll need on the job. Then observe how they approach unfamiliar challenges." The recruitment philosophy reflected lessons Marcus had learned during his own transition from military to civilian work. Traditional hiring processes often excluded people whose experience didn't match conventional expectations. But practical demonstrations revealed capabilities that couldn't be captured in standard applications. The aerospace welding program had attracted attention from manufacturers throughout the region, leading to requests for similar training initiatives in other technical specialties. Marcus was developing programs for electronics assembly, precision machining, and quality control inspection, each designed around the same principles of selecting for character and competence rather than formal qualifications. But success was also generating new challenges that tested Marcus's developing business skills. Growth required systematic approaches to training, quality control, and performance management that went beyond the intuitive methods that worked for smaller operations. Williams' guidance remained invaluable, but Marcus increasingly found himself making independent decisions about program development and resource allocation. The afternoon brought a crisis that would demonstrate how much Marcus had learned about managing complex organizational problems. A fire at one of their partner manufacturing facilities had damaged equipment needed for a major defense contract, threatening not only the immediate project but the company's reputation with a key customer. "We've got 18 welders scheduled to start production Monday morning, and the primary welding stations are offline indefinitely," explained Janet Walsh, the facility's production manager, during an emergency conference call. The contract penalties for missing delivery deadlines could put us out of business. Marcus spent 15 minutes gathering information about the extent of the damage, available backup equipment, and alternative approaches to meeting the production schedule. The technical challenges were significant, but manageable if resources could be coordinated effectively across multiple locations. "Here's what I propose," Marcus said after analyzing the situation. "We distribute the work across 3 facilities, with our most experienced welders providing quality oversight at each location. It'll require some people to travel and work overtime, but we can maintain the delivery schedule while the primary facility recovers." The solution required convincing workers to accept temporary assignments at unfamiliar locations, coordinating transportation and housing arrangements, and establishing quality control procedures that would ensure consistent results across multiple sites. Marcus found himself managing logistics comparable to military operations, but with volunteer participants who could choose to leave if the demands became excessive. The key to success proved to be communication. Instead of simply announcing work assignments, Marcus explained the situation to affected employees, outlined the challenges they faced collectively, and asked for input on how to make the temporary arrangements sustainable. The response reminded him why Williams' companies consistently outperformed conventional operations. "Whatever you need," said Tommy Alvarez, a former Marine who'd graduated from the welding program 6 months earlier. "This contract matters to all of us, not just the company. We've got each other's backs." The sentiment was echoed throughout the workforce. People volunteered for inconvenient assignments, offered to help colleagues with transportation and housing challenges, and worked overtime without complaint to ensure quality standards were maintained despite the disrupted conditions. The defense contract was completed on schedule with 0 defects, earning recognition from the customer and additional work opportunities. "That response didn't happen by accident," William observed during their weekly strategy discussion. "You've built something more valuable than efficient operations. You've created teams that understand shared responsibility for collective success." Marcus was beginning to appreciate the subtle differences between managing employees and leading teams. Military experience had taught him about shared mission commitment, but translating those principles to civilian business contexts required adjustments he was still learning to make. The key seemed to be creating environments where people understood how their individual contributions connected to meaningful outcomes. The success of the crisis response generated requests for Marcus to develop similar programs in other states. Manufacturing companies in Colorado and Texas wanted to establish veteran-focused training initiatives, while government agencies asked about replicating the model for civilian workforce development programs. "We're reaching the limits of what you can manage personally," Williams said as they reviewed expansion opportunities. "It's time to think about building a larger organization that can scale these approaches systematically." The prospect was both exciting and intimidating. Marcus had proven he could develop and manage individual programs, but building a regional organization required capabilities he'd never tested. Strategic planning, financial management, personnel development, regulatory compliance, each represented challenges that went beyond his current experience. "I'll need help," Marcus said honestly. "People who understand the business aspects while sharing the mission commitment." William smiled. "I've been hoping you'd reach that conclusion. There are others like you, people who've proven they can build meaningful enterprises from unconventional foundations. It's time to bring some of them together." The meeting that changed everything took place in a conference room overlooking downtown Denver, with views of the Rocky Mountains providing an appropriately ambitious backdrop. William had assembled 6 people whose backgrounds would have seemed incompatible in traditional business settings, but whose shared experience creating alternative approaches to employment made them natural collaborators. Sarah Martinez, the operations manager from the solar installation company, had developed systematic approaches to training and quality control that could be adapted across different industries. David Kim, founder of the veteran-owned security firm, brought expertise in business development and customer relationship management. Maria Santos, a former Air Force logistics specialist who'd built a successful consulting practice helping small businesses improve their operations, understood the financial and regulatory aspects of scaling enterprises. The other participants included Jessica Chen, a Navy veteran who'd created a network of childcare cooperatives serving military families. Robert Jackson, a former Army engineer who'd developed innovative approaches to infrastructure maintenance. And Patricia Williams, a Marine logistics officer who'd built a transportation company specializing in delivery services for rural communities. Each of you has proven that businesses built around character and competence can succeed in competitive markets, William began. The question now is whether we can systematize these approaches to create opportunities on a national scale. The discussion that followed revealed both the potential and the challenges of expanding beyond regional operations. Each participant had developed solutions to similar problems using approaches that reflected their specific backgrounds and market conditions. The diversity of methods suggested that successful scaling would require flexible frameworks rather than rigid standardization. The common elements are selection criteria and culture development, Marcus observed after listening to detailed descriptions of different operational approaches. We all prioritize character over credentials during recruitment, and we all create environments where people understand their responsibility to team success. Sarah Martinez agreed but raised important questions about maintaining quality during rapid expansion. Small operations succeed because founders can personally evaluate every employee and monitor every project. How do you preserve that level of attention when you're managing hundreds of people across multiple states? The question sparked a debate that would continue for months as they developed what became known as the Integrated Workforce Network. The organization would provide resources, training, and support for locally managed enterprises while maintaining standards that ensured consistent quality and shared values. Think of it as a franchise model, but for social enterprises, Maria Santos suggested. Central resources and proven methodologies, adapted to local conditions by people who understand their communities and markets. The framework that emerged combined Williams' financial resources with the operational expertise each participant had developed through years of building successful enterprises. Local managers would maintain autonomy over daily operations while accessing centralized support for training, business development, and quality assurance. Marcus found himself designated as the network's executive director, responsible for coordinating activities across regions while supporting individual programs, growth, and development. The role represented a significant expansion of his responsibilities, but it also offered the opportunity to impact workforce development on a scale that could influence national employment policy. The first major test of the network's effectiveness came when the Department of Labor invited them to develop a pilot program addressing veteran unemployment in post-industrial communities throughout the Midwest. The project would require establishing operations in cities where traditional manufacturing had declined, creating training programs for emerging industries while building relationships with local employers and community organizations. This is our chance to prove the model works beyond the Southwest, Williams said as they reviewed the Department of Labor's requirements. But it's also a risk. High-profile failure could damage everything we've built so far. Marcus spent 2 weeks visiting potential sites in Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, meeting with local officials, touring abandoned manufacturing facilities, and talking with unemployed workers about their experiences and aspirations. The challenges were more complex than anything he'd encountered in the Southwest, where growing technology and renewable energy sectors provided obvious opportunities for skilled workers. Rust Belt communities faced different problems. Entire industries had disappeared, leaving behind populations with specialized skills that seemed obsolete in emerging economic sectors. Decades of decline had created cultural pessimism that made people suspicious of promises about new opportunities. Local political and business leadership often resisted changes that threatened existing power structures. But Marcus also discovered assets that could be leveraged effectively with appropriate strategies. The region's manufacturing heritage had created a workforce culture that valued precision, reliability, and continuous improvement. Many unemployed workers possessed capabilities that could be adapted to emerging industries with proper training and support. Community organizations had developed strong networks that could facilitate recruitment and retention if they understood the opportunities being created. The solution Marcus developed reflected lessons learned from Williams' original companies while adapting to Midwestern conditions and culture. Instead of importing Southwest-proven approaches, he partnered with local organizations to create training programs that built on existing capabilities while preparing people for available opportunities in logistics, advanced manufacturing, and technical services. The key insight was understanding that successful workforce development required changing employer expectations as well as worker capabilities. Many regional employers had become accustomed to competing primarily on cost, accepting high turnover and minimal quality standards because they assumed reliable workers weren't available. Demonstrating superior alternatives required proving that investing in employee development generated better long-term results than accepting mediocrity. "We're not just training workers," Marcus explained to skeptical business owners during a presentation in Toledo. "We're demonstrating a different approach to human resource management that can provide competitive advantages in quality, reliability, and innovation." The pilot program launched with 3 companies willing to experiment with the network's approach to employee selection and development. A precision machining firm agreed to hire graduates from a 12-week training program focused on computer-controlled manufacturing equipment. A logistics company committed to employing people trained in advanced inventory management and quality control systems. A renewable energy installation company would hire workers trained in both technical skills and customer service approaches. Each partnership required customized training curricula that addressed specific employer needs while maintaining the network's standards for character-based selection and team-oriented culture development. Marcus found himself coordinating with local community colleges, union training centers, and workforce development agencies to create integrated programs that leveraged existing resources while introducing proven innovations. The complexity was challenging, but the results justified the effort. Within 6 months, the pilot programs were producing graduates who not only met employer expectations but exceeded them in ways that generated requests for additional workers. Companies that had initially agreed to hire small numbers of trainees began asking about expanding their participation in network programs. "This is working because you're solving real problems for employers, not just providing them with warm bodies," observed Linda Parker, director of the Toledo Regional Development Authority. "Companies are seeing productivity improvements and quality enhancements that justify the additional investment in employee development." The success of the Midwest pilot program generated national attention from policymakers, business leaders, and academic researchers studying workforce development strategies. Marcus found himself testifying before congressional committees, presenting at business conferences, and collaborating with university researchers documenting the network's approaches and outcomes. But the most meaningful validation came from program participants themselves. Former factory workers who'd been unemployed for years were earning middle-class wages while contributing to products and services that met real market needs. Veterans who'd struggled to find civilian employment that matched their capabilities were building careers that utilized their training and experience effectively. "I haven't felt this useful since I left the Army," said Kevin Morrison, a former infantry sergeant who'd completed the logistics training program and been promoted to shift supervisor within 8 months. "The work matters, the people I work with understand responsibility, and I can see how what I do connects to something bigger than just a paycheck." This sentiment was repeated consistently across network programs. People weren't just finding jobs. They were joining organizations that valued their contributions and provided opportunities for continued growth and development. The retention rates and advancement patterns demonstrated that the network was creating sustainable career paths rather than temporary employment fixes. Williams' vision was proving both practical and scalable. By prioritizing character over credentials and building cultures that supported shared responsibility for collective success, the network was creating economic opportunities that benefited workers, employers, and communities simultaneously. But success was also attracting challenges that would test everything Marcus had learned about building and managing complex organizations. Competing workforce development organizations were questioning the network's approaches and outcomes. Political leaders were proposing regulations that could restrict the flexibility essential to their effectiveness. Most significantly, some large corporations were attempting to co-opt their methods while abandoning the principles that made them successful. The battles ahead would require Marcus to defend not just specific programs, but the underlying philosophy that made the network's success possible. He was about to learn that proving alternative approaches could work was only the beginning of the challenge. Protecting them from forces that wanted to exploit their success while undermining their values would require skills and strategies he was only beginning to develop. The call that would change everything came on a Tuesday morning in late fall, just as Marcus was reviewing quarterly performance reports that showed consistent growth across all network programs. Williams' voice carried an urgency that immediately focused Marcus's attention on potential problems rather than current successes. "We need to meet in person immediately," Williams said without his usual preliminary conversation. "There are developments you need to understand before they become public knowledge." The flight to San Francisco gave Marcus time to consider what kind of crisis could generate such concern. The network's programs were performing well, with expanding employer partnerships and growing government support. Financial projections showed sustainable growth patterns that would allow continued expansion without compromising quality standards. Political relationships were positive, with bipartisan support for approaches that were producing measurable results. But Marcus had learned that success often generated new categories of problems. Visibility attracted attention from organizations that wanted to benefit from proven approaches without accepting the responsibilities that made them effective. Growth created internal challenges that tested organizational capabilities and cultural coherence. Most dangerously, success could lead to complacency that made organizations vulnerable to threats they hadn't anticipated. William's San Francisco office reflected the same understated sophistication Marcus had noticed during their first meeting. Advanced technology was integrated seamlessly into environments that prioritized comfort and functionality over display. The atmosphere suggested serious work accomplished by people who understood both innovation and implementation. "We're facing a coordinated attack designed to discredit our methods and appropriate our results," William began without preliminaries. Several large consulting firms are promoting what they call character-based hiring while ignoring the cultural development that makes it effective. Government agencies are proposing standardized metrics that would force us to prioritize quantity over quality. Most seriously, some of our own partner organizations are being pressured to abandon our approaches in favor of conventional practices. The briefing that followed revealed the scope of the challenges facing the network. Corporate consulting firms had studied their methods and were marketing simplified versions to clients who wanted better hiring results without changing their fundamental approach to employee management. Government officials were developing regulations that would require workforce development programs to meet standardized criteria that conflicted with the flexibility essential to the network's effectiveness. "The real threat is mission drift," William continued. "External pressure to conform to conventional expectations could gradually erode the principles that make our programs successful. We could end up running traditional job training initiatives that produce traditional results while maintaining the illusion that we're doing something different." Marcus understood the danger. Military organizations faced similar challenges when political pressures forced them to adopt procedures that interfered with mission effectiveness. The temptation to compromise principles for short-term advantages often led to long-term failures that damaged both specific operations and institutional credibility. "What do you recommend?" Marcus asked. William's response revealed why their partnership had been so successful. "I recommend we double down on what works while building defenses against what doesn't. Expand the network aggressively to demonstrate superior results at scale. Document our methods thoroughly to prevent misrepresentation. Most importantly, maintain absolute commitment to our core principles regardless of external pressure." The strategy session that followed involved key network leaders joining by secure video conference from their respective regions. Sarah Martinez reported pressure from state agencies to modify training programs in ways that would reduce their effectiveness. David Kim described attempts by large security companies to hire away his best employees while copying his operational methods. Maria Santos outlined regulatory proposals that would impose reporting requirements designed for traditional programs but inappropriate for network operations. "They're trying to force us into boxes that don't fit what we do," summarized Jessica Chen from her childcare cooperative network. "The question is whether we adapt our methods to meet their expectations or defend our approaches by proving they work better than alternatives." Marcus found himself articulating a response that reflected everything he'd learned about leadership during his military service and business development during his work with William. "We prove superiority through performance while building alliances with people who understand why our methods work. We don't compromise principles, but we explain them clearly enough that supporters can defend them effectively." The discussion that followed established the network's strategy for responding to external challenges while maintaining internal coherence. They would accelerate expansion to demonstrate scalability, enhance documentation to prevent misrepresentation, and build relationships with academic researchers who could provide independent validation of their approaches and outcomes. Most importantly, they would maintain absolute commitment to character-based selection and culture development, regardless of pressure to adopt more conventional methods. The network's success depended on these principles, and abandoning them would eliminate the advantages that justified the organization's existence. "This is going to require sustained effort over several years," William concluded. "The forces trying to co-opt our methods have significant resources and political connections, but we have something they don't: proof that our approaches work and people whose lives have been improved by participating in them. Marcus left the meeting with a clear understanding of the challenges ahead and renewed commitment to the mission that had transformed his own life. The homeless veteran who'd stopped to help a stranger with a broken RV had become the leader of a national organization that was proving alternative approaches to economic development could succeed at scale. But the real test was just beginning. Defending the network's principles against well-funded opposition while continuing to expand and improve their programs would require capabilities Marcus was still developing. The battles ahead would determine whether character-based employment could become a permanent feature of American economic life, or remain an interesting experiment that eventually succumbed to conventional pressures. The stakes were higher than Marcus had initially realized. The network wasn't just creating jobs. It was demonstrating that business success and social responsibility were compatible when organizations prioritized the right values and implemented them consistently. Proving that point conclusively would require everything Marcus had learned about leadership, strategy, and the courage to defend principles when compromise seemed easier. The congressional hearing room fell silent as Marcus Rivera finished his testimony, the weight of 200 spectators and a dozen committee members focused on his final words. 6 months of investigation into the integrated workforce network had culminated in this moment, where years of work would either be validated as a revolutionary approach to employment or dismissed as an unsustainable experiment. "Mr. Rivera," said Congresswoman Patricia Davis, the committee chair, "you've presented compelling statistics about job placement and retention rates. But critics argue that your methods amount to discrimination against candidates who don't fit your subjective character criteria. How do you respond to allegations that the network excludes people based on personality traits rather than genuine qualifications?" Marcus had anticipated this question during weeks of preparation with the network's legal team. The inquiry represented a fundamental misunderstanding of their selection process, but it was also the argument their opponents were using to challenge the network's legitimacy through regulatory restrictions. "Congresswoman, our selection criteria focus on demonstrated behavior, not personality assessments," Marcus replied. "We evaluate how candidates respond to practical challenges, how they work with others to solve problems, and whether they take responsibility for outcomes. These are measurable actions that predict job performance, not subjective personality judgments." The distinction was crucial but difficult to communicate to people who hadn't observed the network's methods directly. Traditional hiring practices relied heavily on credentials and interviews that could be manipulated by candidates who understood how to present themselves effectively. The network's approach required candidates to demonstrate capabilities through practical exercises that revealed actual competence and character. "But surely you acknowledge that your methods could inadvertently discriminate against people from different cultural backgrounds or educational experiences," pressed Congressman Michael Thompson, who had been critical of the network throughout the investigation. Marcus felt the familiar tension that came with defending principles against people who seemed determined to misunderstand them. "Congressman, our outcomes demonstrate exactly the opposite. 63% of network participants are from minority communities, 47% are women, and 38% lack traditional post-secondary credentials. We're creating opportunities for people who are typically excluded from good jobs, not the other way around." The statistics were powerful, but Marcus knew that data alone wouldn't resolve the political challenges facing the network. Their opponents weren't genuinely concerned about discrimination. They were threatened by approaches that exposed the limitations of conventional employment systems. Large consulting firms lost business when companies could develop effective workforces without expensive hiring processes. Government agencies faced budget pressure when alternative programs produced better results at lower cost. The afternoon session featured testimony from network participants whose stories provided human context for the statistical evidence. Kevin Morrison, the former infantry sergeant who'd become a logistics supervisor, described how the network's training had restored his confidence in civilian employment possibilities. Sarah Washington, a single mother who'd completed advanced manufacturing training, explained how character-based hiring had given her opportunities that traditional employers had denied due to gaps in her work history. "The difference is that they looked at what I could do, not what was missing from my resume," Sarah testified. "Nobody else was willing to give me a chance to prove myself." The testimonies were compelling, but Marcus could see that some committee members remained skeptical. Political pressure from interests threatened by the network's success was countering evidence about program effectiveness. The hearing would likely end with a divided recommendation that failed to resolve the regulatory uncertainty undermining network operations. The breakthrough came during the final day of hearings, when William Chen took the witness stand with a proposal that reframed the entire debate. Instead of defending the network against regulatory restrictions, he offered to submit their methods to rigorous academic evaluation while expanding programs to serve communities throughout the country. "I propose establishing the National Institute for Character-Based Employment, funded through a combination of private philanthropy and federal research grants," William announced. "This institute would document our methods systematically, train other organizations to implement them effectively, and measure outcomes using standards developed collaboratively with academic researchers and government agencies." The proposal was brilliant because it addressed critics' concerns about accountability while accelerating expansion of proven approaches. University researchers would provide independent validation of network methods. Government oversight would ensure compliance with employment regulations. Most importantly, successful programs would be replicated nationally, instead of remaining limited to regions where the network had established operations. "Mr. Chen," said Congresswoman Davis with obvious interest, "what level of funding would this institute require, and how would you ensure that expanded programs maintain the quality standards you've achieved in current operations?" William's response demonstrated why he'd been successful in both technology development and social enterprise creation. Initial funding of $50 million annually for 5 years, with expansion contingent on achieving measurable outcomes. Quality standards would be maintained through intensive training for local program managers, continuous monitoring of participant outcomes, and regular evaluation by independent researchers. The funding commitment was substantial enough to attract serious political attention while remaining modest compared to federal workforce development spending that produced inferior results. More importantly, the proposal offered politicians an opportunity to support innovative approaches without appearing to favor experimental programs over established agencies. Marcus watched the committee members' reactions and recognized the shift that Williams' proposal had created. Instead of debating whether the network's methods should be restricted, they were now considering how to scale successful approaches nationally while maintaining appropriate oversight. The conversation had moved from defensive to constructive, exactly the outcome William had intended. The committee's final recommendation exceeded Marcus's most optimistic expectations. Not only did they endorse the National Institute proposal, but they also included language directing federal agencies to prioritize character-based employment approaches in their own workforce development programs. The network had gone from defending its existence to becoming a model for national policy implementation. "This represents complete vindication of everything we've built," Sarah Martinez said during the celebration dinner that evening. "We've proven that doing the right thing can succeed even in Washington." Marcus felt deep satisfaction about the political victory, but he was already thinking about the challenges that success would create. Scaling the network's approaches from regional operations to national implementation would require capabilities and resources that pushed beyond anything they'd attempted previously. The Institute would need to train hundreds of local managers, establish quality control systems across dozens of states, and maintain cultural coherence while adapting to diverse local conditions. "The real work starts now," William observed as they reviewed implementation timelines for the Institute. "Political support creates opportunities, but transforming opportunities into sustainable programs requires execution that maintains our core principles while adapting to much larger scale." The next 18 months would test every leadership skill Marcus had developed since his first encounter with William's broken-down RV. Establishing the National Institute required recruiting and training regional directors who understood both the network's methods and the local conditions where they would be implemented. Each new location presented unique challenges that demanded creative solutions while maintaining consistency with proven approaches. The Denver office became the Institute's headquarters, chosen for its central location and access to transportation networks that connected all regions of the country. Marcus found himself managing a staff of 60 people, responsible for program development, training delivery, quality assurance, and performance evaluation across 28 states. The complexity was overwhelming at times, but the mission remained clear. Every new program created opportunities for people who had been excluded from good employment, despite possessing the character and capabilities that employers actually needed. Every successful placement proved that alternative approaches to workforce development could produce superior results when implemented consistently and supported adequately. The Institute's first annual report documented achievements that exceeded even Williams' ambitious projections. Over 8,000 people had completed training programs, with 92% finding employment within 6 months of graduation. Average starting salaries were 37% higher than comparable traditional programs, and retention rates after 12 months were 86%. But the numbers that meant most to Marcus were the personal transformation stories that accompanied each statistical summary. Veterans who'd struggled with civilian employment were building meaningful careers. Single parents were achieving financial stability that allowed them to focus on family responsibilities. Displaced workers were discovering that their experience and character qualified them for opportunities they'd never considered possible. The success generated requests for expansion that pushed the Institute toward challenges William had anticipated, but Marcus was only beginning to understand. Corporate consulting firms were demanding access to Institute training materials so they could offer similar services to their clients. Government agencies wanted to modify Institute methods to fit existing regulatory frameworks that would eliminate their effectiveness. Academic institutions proposed research partnerships that could provide credibility but might also constrain innovation. "We're facing the classic scaling dilemma," William explained during one of their strategic planning sessions. "How do you maintain quality and coherence while expanding rapidly enough to meet demand? How do you preserve innovation while satisfying oversight requirements? How do you share knowledge without enabling competitors to copy your methods while abandoning your principles?" Marcus had been wrestling with exactly these questions as he observed the Institute's regional operations. Programs that maintained close relationships with Institute headquarters consistently produced excellent results, but locations that began adapting methods to local preferences or regulatory requirements showed declining effectiveness over time. "The solution is franchising our culture, not just our techniques," Marcus realized. "We need to train people who understand why our methods work, not just how to implement them mechanically." This insight led to the Institute's most important innovation, the Leadership Development Program that selected and trained regional managers who could maintain program effectiveness while adapting to local conditions. The program combined intensive technical training with immersive experiences that helped participants understand the philosophical foundations underlying Institute methods. "You can't maintain character-based employment without leaders who embody the character principles themselves," Marcus explained to the first cohort of leadership development participants. "This isn't about learning procedures to follow. It's about developing judgment that allows you to make decisions consistent with our values when you encounter situations we haven't prepared you for specifically." The Leadership Development Program became the Institute's signature contribution to national workforce development policy. Instead of creating standardized training curricula that could be implemented anywhere, they were developing leaders who could create effective programs tailored to specific communities while maintaining consistency with proven principles. The approach attracted attention from international organizations studying American workforce development innovations. Delegations visited Institute programs from countries facing similar challenges with unemployment, economic transition, and social mobility. Marcus found himself consulting with government officials from Canada, Australia, and several European nations about adapting Institute methods to different economic and cultural contexts. "What you've created here isn't just an employment program," observed Dr. Klaus Faber, a workforce development specialist from Germany's Federal Ministry of Labor. "You've demonstrated a different philosophy of human resource development that could influence policy throughout the developed world." The international recognition was gratifying, but Marcus remained focused on domestic challenges that would determine whether the Institute's success could be sustained long-term. Political support was strong but dependent on continued demonstration of superior results. Corporate partnerships were expanding but required constant attention to prevent mission drift. Most critically, the Institute needed to prove that character-based employment could become a permanent feature of American economic life, rather than a temporary experiment that would fade when Williams' funding ended. The solution emerged through an unexpected partnership with labor unions that had initially been skeptical of Institute methods. Union leaders had worried that character-based hiring could be used to exclude union members or undermine collective bargaining agreements. But as they observed Institute programs producing highly skilled workers who commanded premium wages, their perspective shifted toward collaboration rather than opposition. "Your people understand the value of quality work and collective responsibility," said Tom Rodriguez, president of the Southwest Regional Council of Machinists. "That's exactly what we want in union membership. The question is whether we can adapt our approaches to support what you're doing instead of treating it as competition." The partnership that developed between the Institute and participating unions created a sustainable model that addressed both organizations' core interests. Institute programs provided unions with access to skilled workers who understood both technical competence and workplace solidarity. Union membership provided Institute graduates with career advancement opportunities and collective bargaining power that ensured continued wage growth. This partnership proves that character-based employment and organized labor are natural allies, Marcus explained during a presentation to the AFL-CIO National Convention. Both prioritize competence, reliability, and shared responsibility for collective success. Both understand that sustainable employment relationships require mutual respect and long-term commitment. The union partnerships provided the Institute with political protection and financial sustainability that reduced dependence on Williams' philanthropy. Union pension funds began investing in companies that employed Institute graduates, creating economic incentives for businesses to participate in character-based hiring. Labor leaders became advocates for Institute expansion, using their political influence to support funding and regulatory flexibility. The transformation was remarkable. An organization that had started as one man's experiment in alternative hiring had become a national movement supported by business, labor, government, and academic institutions. Character-based employment was evolving from an innovative concept to an established practice that was improving economic outcomes for workers, employers, and communities throughout the country. Marcus stood in the same congressional hearing room where he'd defended the Institute 5 years earlier, but now he was testifying about legislation that would make character-based employment a standard component of federal workforce development policy. The homeless veteran who'd stopped to repair a stranger's RV had become a national leader whose work was influencing economic policy at the highest levels of government. The success of the National Institute for Character-Based Employment demonstrates that American workers possess capabilities and character that traditional hiring practices often fail to recognize. Marcus told the assembled committee members, "By focusing on what people can do, rather than what credentials they possess, we've created pathways to meaningful employment for hundreds of thousands of Americans who were previously excluded from economic opportunity." The statistics he presented reflected achievements that had exceeded everyone's initial projections. Institute programs were operating in all 50 states, with expansion into rural communities that had been underserved by traditional workforce development initiatives. Participant outcomes continued to outperform conventional programs across every metric that mattered: employment rates, wage levels, career advancement, and long-term retention. But the numbers told only part of the story. The real measure of success was visible in communities where Institute programs had helped transform local economic conditions. Manufacturing companies were locating operations in areas where they could access Institute-trained workers. Service businesses were expanding because they could hire reliable employees who understood customer service excellence. Construction companies were competing for major projects because their Institute-trained crews delivered superior quality and reliability. "You've created something that goes beyond employment policy," observed Congresswoman Davis, who had become one of the Institute's strongest supporters. "You've demonstrated that focusing on character and competence can rebuild economic opportunity in communities that traditional approaches had written off as permanently disadvantaged." The legislation that emerged from the hearing established character-based employment as a national priority, while providing resources for continued expansion and improvement of Institute programs. Federal agencies would be required to incorporate character-based hiring in their own employment practices. Workforce development funding would prioritize programs that demonstrated superior participant outcomes. Most importantly, the Institute would receive permanent federal support that ensured continued innovation and expansion. William Chen observed the legislative victory from the gallery, his satisfaction evident as he watched Marcus handle questions from committee members with the expertise and authority of someone who devoted years to mastering complex policy challenges. The technology billionaire who'd created the Institute as an experiment in alternative employment had witnessed its evolution into a permanent institution that would influence American economic development for decades. "You've exceeded every expectation I had when I first offered you that job," William told Marcus during their celebration dinner. "You've built something that will continue creating opportunities long after both of us are gone." Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him from homelessness to national leadership, from repairing a stranger's RV to testifying before Congress about policies that would affect millions of workers. The transformation still amazed him, but it also reinforced his understanding that individual success was meaningful only when it created opportunities for others facing similar challenges. "The real measure of what we've accomplished isn't my personal story," Marcus replied. "It's the thousands of people who found meaningful work because we proved that character and competence matter more than credentials and connections. It's the communities that have been revitalized because employers can access the skilled, reliable workers they need to succeed. It's the demonstration that doing the right thing can produce better results than accepting conventional limitations." The Institute's annual conference had grown from a small gathering of regional managers to a national event that attracted business leaders, government officials, academic researchers, and labor representatives from throughout the country. The diversity of participants reflected the broad coalition that had formed around character-based employment as both an economic strategy and a social movement. Marcus's keynote address focused on the lessons learned during the Institute's evolution from experimental program to national institution. The most important insight was that sustainable change required alignment between individual character development and organizational culture creation. Programs succeeded when they selected for character while building environments that supported and rewarded character-based behavior. Character-based employment works because it aligns individual capabilities with organizational needs, Marcus explained to the assembled audience. People want to contribute their best efforts to meaningful work. Employers need reliable, competent workers who understand shared responsibility for collective success. When hiring practices focus on character and competence, both needs are satisfied simultaneously. The conference featured presentations from Institute graduates who'd become business owners, community leaders, and advocates for workforce development innovation. Their stories demonstrated that character-based employment created not just jobs but career pathways that allowed people to achieve their full potential while contributing to community prosperity. Kevin Morrison, the former infantry sergeant who'd become Marcus's first major success story, now managed a logistics company that employed over 200 people, most of them Institute graduates. Sarah Washington had advanced from manufacturing technician to plant supervisor while completing an engineering degree funded by her employer's education assistance program. Their achievements represented thousands of similar success stories that proved character-based employment could transform individual lives while strengthening entire communities. As Marcus looked out at the conference audience, he saw representatives of the movement that had grown far beyond anything he could have imagined during those early days in Williams RV. Business executives were sharing strategies for implementing character-based hiring in their own companies. Government officials were discussing policy innovations that would support expansion of effective programs. Union leaders were describing partnerships that aligned organized labor with character-based employment principles. The homeless veteran who'd stopped to help a stranger had discovered something more valuable than financial security or professional recognition. He'd found his life's work, proving that focusing on character and competence could create economic opportunities that served individual needs while strengthening community prosperity. The simple act of repairing a broken radiator hose had led to a national movement that was transforming American workforce development. But Marcus understood that the movement's ultimate success would be measured not by its current achievements, but by its ability to continue evolving and improving over time. The principles were established, the methods were proven, and the institutional support was secure. The next generation of leaders would determine whether character-based employment became a permanent feature of American economic life, or remained a historical curiosity that had flourished briefly before fading into irrelevance. The Institute's leadership development program was already training that next generation, selecting and preparing people who understood both the technical aspects of effective workforce development and the philosophical foundations that made it sustainable. These future leaders would face challenges that Marcus could anticipate but not fully prepare them for, just as William had prepared Marcus for responsibilities he hadn't initially understood. The real test of what we've built, Marcus concluded his keynote address, is whether the people we're training today will be able to adapt our methods to challenges we haven't encountered yet, while maintaining the principles that make them effective. Character-based employment isn't a destination, it's a commitment to continuous improvement in how we connect human capabilities with economic opportunities. The standing ovation that followed reflected not just appreciation for Marcus's leadership, but recognition that the movement he'd helped create was ready for its next phase of development. The Institute had proven that alternative approaches to workforce development could succeed at national scale. Now it was time to prove that success could be sustained and expanded by leaders who understood both the methods and the mission that made them effective. Marcus Rivera had completed the journey from homeless veteran to national leader, But more importantly, he'd helped create a movement that would continue long after his own direct involvement ended. The character-based employment revolution was no longer dependent on any individual leader. It had become a self-sustaining force for economic opportunity and community development that would benefit generations of Americans who deserved chances to prove their worth through their actions rather than their credentials. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.